Cold air settles over the edges of the airbase at Brandenburg as the first light spreads across the cracked pavement. The wind drifts low, carrying the distant echo of artillery from the Western Front. Engineers move between parked fighters with steady, silent coordination. The ground is dotted with fuel stains and abandoned crates. A pair of Bf-109s rest under open awnings, panels removed, cables hanging loose. General Adolf Galland walks across the central apron with deliberate steps. His coat swings lightly behind him as he approaches the operations hut. Inside, officers stand around a cluttered table filled with reconnaissance photos, fuel consumption charts, and casualty reports from the last bombing interception. The tension in the room hangs in the air like static. Galland enters. The officers straighten at once. He removes his gloves, places them on the table, and studies the photographs scattered across the surface. Columns of smoke rise from destroyed factories. Bridges lie broken across dark rivers. In several frames, American bombers fly unchallenged through patches of cloud, their escorts in tight formation. He taps one photograph lightly with a finger. They cross the river again. Yes, her general, a major responds. Minimal losses. Their escort range continues to increase. Galland sits, leaning over the table without speaking. Another officer hands him a telegram just delivered from Berlin. He scans the short lines, folds the paper, and lays it aside. Fuel allocation reduced again. The officer says quietly. Galland only nods. Outside, a low rumble shakes the window panes. A formation of Luftwaffe fighters passes overhead, climbing slowly, engine strained. Their silhouettes vanish into the pale sky. Galland watches them through the window until they disappear completely. He steps back to the table. Show me today's readiness reports. Folders slide toward him. He opens the first. Aircraft grounded due to lack of parts. Pilots unfit from exhaustion. Crew shortages. Empty fuel reserves at satellite fields. He closes the folder. An intelligence from the West? An adjutant presents another set of documents. Maps marked with red arrows. Supply routes traced across Belgium. Radio intercepts from Allied command. He places a finger on a line of movement, moving steadily eastward. Patton is pushing faster than expected, the adjutant says. Galland studies the arrow. He will not stop for pauses, Galland replies. He never does. He keeps pressure until something breaks. Silence fills the room. Officers glance at each other, but avoid speaking. The door opens with a sudden gust of cold air. A messenger enters, salutes, hands a sealed envelope. Galland breaks the seal, reads the short statement, and lowers the page slowly. The officers wait. Galland sets the envelope beside the charts. Eisenhower is shifting more fighter groups to long-range escort. The group exchanges restrained looks. One officer shifts his stance. If they escort the bombers from England to central Germany and back, he says, our defensive line collapses. Galland walks back to the window. The runway is quiet again. A fuel truck moves lazily toward a row of grounded aircraft. Mechanics stand around a disassembled engine, motionless for a moment as if waiting for orders that will never come. He turns his head slightly. Our pilots are fighting with skill and courage, he says. But courage does not add horsepower, and skill does not extend range. He walks slowly back to the table, picking up a reconnaissance map. Thick clouds marked in gray. Expected bomber routes. Interception altitude estimates. He lays the map down. We are fighting an air war with machines unable to match theirs. We can delay defeat, but we cannot reverse it like this. No one answers at first. Officers look down at their boots or the surface of the table. The operations chief clears his throat. Berlin requests a proposal to stabilize the Western air defenses. They want an answer by tomorrow. Galland closes his eyes for a brief moment, then opens them and examines the nearest photo again. Rows of American fighters circle bombers in perfect spacing. Their fuel tanks are still attached, untouched. He sets the photo back on the table. I'll give them an answer. Later that morning, Galland walks through the maintenance hangar. The large doors remain half open, letting in cold air that mixes with the smell of oil and metal. Sparks flash from a welder repairing a damaged wing. A pilot sits on an overturned crate, helmet on his knee, staring at the floor. Galland stops beside him. When did you return? An hour ago, her general. Galland looks at the scorched paint on the pilot's flight jacket. How was the engagement? The pilot thinks, searching for words. We dove from above. They didn't break formation. Their Mustangs came from the sun. We tried turning inside them, but they kept their speed. I lost my wingman in the climb. He lifts his eyes. They fly like they know we can't follow. Galland nods once. Get some rest. He walks farther into the hangar. Mechanics pull a tarp off a grounded FW-190. The aircraft is riddled with holes. A shattered canopy hangs loose. One of the mechanics meets Galland's gaze briefly before returning to his work. At the back of the hangar, a radio technician struggles with a damaged transmitter. Wires spill from the open panel. Static crackles weakly through the speaker. Galland stands behind him. Any intercepts from Allied command this morning? Only fragments, her general. But one message repeated several times. Allied ground forces report rapid progress through the Ardennes. They expect Luftwaffe resistance to weaken further. Galland looks at the transmitter. They are planning for our collapse before we even admit it. The technician lowers his head. Galland walks outside again. He stands near the runway, hands behind his back, scanning the distant horizon. Light snow begins to drift. The airfield feels hollow, as if waiting for something that does not come. An officer approaches from the side. Her general. Berlin expects reassurance. They want confidence. They want encouragement. Galland watches a single fighter taxi for departure. Its engine coughs repeatedly before stabilizing. Encouragement will not change reality, he says, and reality is closing in. The officer remains silent. Galland turns from the runway and begins walking toward the command building. Prepare the staff room. Tonight, we begin drafting the report. The officer salutes. Inside the dimly lit building, Galland pauses by a corridor window. The last traces of daylight fade over the rooftops. He observes the silhouettes of grounded aircraft in the distance, frozen in place like relics of a war slipping away from them. He remains motionless. For a long moment, the entire base seems to hold its breath. And the conflict that waits beyond the borders, the unstoppable advance of Allied air power, the tightening grip of a war turning decisively, stands on the edge of becoming undeniable. Night settles over the base with a low ceiling of clouds. Lamps illuminate narrow paths between the hangars, casting long shadows across stacks of ammunition crates. A truck carrying spare parts moves slowly along the main road, its headlights flickering. Exhaust drifts into the cold air. Inside the staff room, officers gather around a large wooden table. Maps overlap each other. Sheets of fuel statistics spread across the corners. Pencil marks indicate shrinking reserves. Galland enters and closes the door behind him. The room quiets. He walks to the center of the table. Show me bomber activity from the last 48 hours. A captain steps forward and hands him a cluster of documents. Galland spreads them out. Lines trace to B-17 and B. 24 routes from England to deep within Germany. Escort patterns tighten with each new report. The Mustang presence grows across the charts. The officers wait, eyes fixed on him. Galland points to one map. They crossed this sector 3 times yesterday. Why was our interception delayed? The captain clears his throat. We had fuel for only one full scramble. Our forward field reported that half their fighters couldn't take off. Frozen fuel lines. Missing ground crew. We attempted a second launch, but Galland raises a hand. I understand. He slides the reports aside and turns to the operations chief. What about our radar coverage? Gaps from the north and southwest. Several stations are short-staffed. Repairs are incomplete. Galland crosses his arms, studying the lines of approaching enemy routes drawn on the map. The room remains silent, except for faint tapping of rain against a window. He steps back and looks at the officers one by one. We are losing initiative. And once initiative is gone, the sky belongs to the one who takes it. No one speaks. They know it. They have known it for weeks, maybe months. A lieutenant opens a new folder. Her general. We intercepted more radio traffic from Allied ground forces. Patton's armored divisions passed another river line. Their engineers rebuilt a bridge in half the time expected. Eisenhower's staff anticipates no significant Luftwaffe interference during their advance. Galland's eyes narrow slightly. They speak freely. Yes, her general. They assume we cannot strike them. Galland walks to the window. Outside, a mechanic pushes a fuel cart toward a lone fighter. The wind shifts, rattling the frame. A squad of guards marches across the courtyard, boots hitting the ground in perfect rhythm. He turns back. Prepare the projection charts. The lieutenant unrolls a long sheet of paper across the table. It shows Germany divided into zones with current operational ranges for Luftwaffe fighters. Galland traces the diagonal line marking maximum reach. Reduce this by 20%, he orders. 20? The operations chief asks. Fuel shortages. Spare parts shortages. Pilot fatigue. Theoretical range is no longer actual range. The chief adjusts the calculation quickly, sliding markers inward. The area they can realistically defend shrinks across the map. Galland watches the change. Now overlay their escort reach. The captain places a transparent sheet over the map, showing the Mustang's range from newly captured Allied positions. The overlap covers nearly all remaining industrial centers. The officers shift uncomfortably. Galland taps the center of the map. This is what defeat looks like from the air. Minutes later, a phone rings. The operations chief answers, listens, then turns. Interception group returning. Only 3 aircraft left. The officers follow Galland outside. The night air hits them sharply. Engines approach from the west, strained and uneven. 3 fighters descend, landing with rough, uneven rolls. 1 aircraft taxis with smoke trailing from its exhaust. Another's landing gear shudders violently before locking. Ground crew run to meet them. A pilot is helped out of his cockpit. His knees give slightly, but he stays upright. Galland approaches the nearest aircraft. The fuselage bears scorch marks along the tail. Bullet holes line the wings. The pilot removes his goggles and looks at Galland. Galland speaks quietly. Report. We climbed into formation from below. Their escorts were already above us. They spotted us before we closed the gap. We tried to break through, but they kept the bombers covered. They didn't chase far. They didn't need to. Galland nods. Losses? 4. 2 more unconfirmed. He looks into the pilot's eyes for a brief moment, then moves to the next aircraft. The canopy is stuck halfway open. A mechanic pulls at it while the pilot tries to push from inside. Galland examines the shattered instrument panel, then steps back. The operations chief approaches him. Her general. How do we respond to Berlin? They expect an optimistic assessment. Galland keeps his gaze on the damaged aircraft. We respond with truth. The chief hesitates. Galland continues walking along the line of returning fighters. He stops beside the last one, the one trailing smoke. A crewman hoses down a small flame near the exhaust. The pilot remains seated, exhausted. Galland places a hand on the fuselage. The operations chief catches up. Berlin will not appreciate a pessimistic report. Galland turns his head slightly. It's not pessimism. It's reality. And reality doesn't need anyone's approval. Back in command building, the staff resumes work. Typewriters click. Papers shuffle. A map is pinned to the wall with new markings. Galland stands at the center of the room. We need clarity. Not hope. Not illusions. Clarity. He walks to the large map. The Allies have solved every problem we hoped would slow them down. Range. Supply lines. Coordination. They no longer fight us on equal terms. They dictate the terms. He picks up a pencil and draws a single line across the Western Front. Eisenhower pushes steadily. Patton pushes rapidly. They rely on the same element we once controlled. Momentum. He sets the pencil down. They have momentum because their skies are secure. And their skies are secure because their fighters dominate ours. An adjutant looks up from his notes. Her general. What do we write in the section requesting strategic recommendations? Galland's eyes settle on the faded reconnaissance photos covering the table. He pauses. Then he speaks. Write that unless we regain air superiority, all operations on the ground are temporary. He leans over the chart, pressing a hand against its edge. Write that our pilots will continue to fight with discipline. But discipline cannot replace what we lack. He straightens. And right that the enemy has crossed the threshold where defeat becomes a matter of time, not balance. A heavy silence spreads across the room. The officers lower their gazes, some adjusting their papers, others staring at the maps as if they could will them to change. Galland looks toward the window, where the faint glow of the runway lights flickers in the darkness. Begin drafting. I will sign it before dawn. The officers nod. Work resumes. Pen scratch. Papers slide. Calculations form. The storm outside grows stronger. Wind lashes against the building. The war presses closer with every hour. And the truth Galland has been sensing, the shift that began months earlier, the one Patton and Eisenhower recognized long before, tightens around him with undeniable force. A thin layer of frost settles over the airfield by dawn. The lamps fade as natural light grows across the runway. Machinery hums in the distance. A pair of trucks move slowly between the hangars, hauling crates marked with maintenance codes. A single Me-262 stands under a tarp, guarded by soldiers who watch every movement around it. Inside the command building, Galland enters the strategy room. The staff is still working from the night before. Papers cover the desks. Coffee cups sit half full. No one has slept. When they notice him, they stand, but Galland motions for them to continue. He walks to the wide table, where the final version of the report lies open. He scans the first pages. The words outline declining aircraft readiness, fuel shortages, expanding Allied fighter range, and the rapid collapse of defensive nodes. He turns the page. You included the projected loss of the industrial corridor? He asks. Yes, her general. The chief replies. Based on current estimates, we cannot defend it beyond 2 weeks. Galland studies projection without speaking. Behind him, officers wait, unsure if he approves or rejects the calculations. He closes the folder slowly. Prepare a copy for Berlin, another for the High Command Conference, and one for myself. The chief nods and gestures for clerk to begin typing. Galland steps to the window. Outside, the sun rises behind the hangars, outlining the silhouettes of damaged fighters left on the far side field. A group of mechanics roll a covered engine block across the pavement. The frost crunches beneath their boots. An adjutant approaches quietly. Her general. A courier arrived from the Western Front. He brings updated field reports. Galland turns. Bring him in. The courier enters still wearing his field coat, mud on the hem, helmet under his arm. He salutes and hands Galland a packet sealed in red tape. Galland breaks it open and unfolds the pages. The first report details Allied ground progress. Patton's armored units have crossed another defensive line. The report describes a pace that outmatches German predictions. Eisenhower's staff anticipates little interference from the Luftwaffe. Galland reads the lines twice. He lowers the page slightly. They know we can't strike them, he says. The courier does not answer. Galland moves to the table, sets the papers down, and looks at the officers. They move with confidence because our presence in the sky no longer influences their decisions. He taps the top page. When a commander advances without looking up, the air war is already lost. A sudden crackle interrupts the room. The field radio sputters to life. Static fills the air. A voice cuts through the noise. An emergency broadcast from a forward airfield. Enemy bombers approaching from the northwest. Escort heavy. Requesting immediate reinforcement. Galland steps toward the radio. Which sector? The operator adjusts the frequency. Sector H. They are calling for any available fighters. Galland turns to the operations chief. What do we have ready? The chief hesitates. 3 aircraft fueled. 2 more on standby, but they lack wing guns. The rest, either grounded or waiting for parts. Galland walks to the map board. Launch the 3. Send the 2 unarmed to climb behind them. They can act as decoys, force the escorts to commit. The chief responds quickly, calling a scramble order. Alarm sirens echo across the base. Pilots run from the barracks. Mechanics rush to the fighters lined up near the runway. Propellers spin to life. Exhaust smoke spills into the cold morning air. Galland watches the window as the first aircraft taxis forward. A mechanic hits the side of the engine cowling. urging it to keep running. The pilot nods and rolls toward the runway. He joins the operations chief outside. The fighters accelerate, lifting off one by one. Their engines strain at full climb, disappearing into the rising sky. Galland keeps his eyes on the horizon. An officer steps beside him. With 5 aircraft, they cannot break through a full escort line. Galland answers without looking away. They don't need to break through. They need to show they are still here. Hours later, the staff regroups inside the conference room. The fighters did not return on schedule. The radio remains silent. Officers attempt to focus on paperwork, but their eyes drift toward the door every few minutes. Galland sits at the table, reviewing the second half of the report. Numbers repeat themselves. Losses, grounded aircraft, empty fuel depots. He sets the papers aside and rubs his forehead. The operations chief enters. Her general. Contact from our pilots. Galland stands immediately. Where? The chief hands him a transcript. Galland reads the brief lines. 1 aircraft damaged, another shot down, the remaining 3 forced to disengage. At the bottom of the page, scribbled in pencil, is the final message from the lead pilot. We tried to climb. They were already above us. Galland lowers the page. He walks back to the table and places a transcript next to the report he must sign. The papers sit side by side, one reflecting a single failed sortie, the other reflecting the entire war turning against them. The officers wait. Some shift their weight. Others remain still. Galland lifts the report again, opens to the section labeled Strategic Forecast. He reads a paragraph. He reads it again. Then he closes the file. This is the truth, he says. We either present it or join the illusion. No one challenges him. He takes a pen from the table and signs the document. The sound of the pen scratching the paper echoes in the quiet room. Later, he walks alone across the courtyard. Snowflakes drift down, melting on his coat. A single aircraft returns in the distance, limping as it approaches the runway. The landing gear shutters on contact. Ground crew run toward it. Galland slows his steps. The pilot climbs out with difficulty. Mechanics support him as he steps onto the wing. Galland approaches. Report. The pilot speaks carefully, pausing between breaths. They saw us before we saw them. They held altitude. They didn't chase. They just blocked us from reaching the bombers. Galland looks directly into his eyes. Did you hit anything? No, her general. Galland nods once. He steps back and watches the crew examine the damaged fighter. The torque of the engine weakens. Smoke rolls from the seams. A lieutenant approaches from behind. Her general, Berlin expects your presence tomorrow for the high command briefing. Galland watches the smoke fade into the air. They will not like what I bring. Should we adjust the report? Make the wording less. Galland stops walking and turns his head. No. The lieutenant closes his mouth immediately. Galland walks toward the operations building without looking back. Inside, he places the signed report on the table. The officers stand around him, waiting. Galland speaks calmly. This is where we stop pretending. The Allies saw the truth months ago. Patton saw it when his columns advanced without fear of our fighters. Eisenhower saw it with his bombers cross the Ruhr untouched. He places a hand on the report. Now we see it as well. His officers remain silent, the weight of the words settling across the room. Through the window, the sky begins to darken again. The distant rumble of engines fades. The remaining pilots move slowly across the field, helmets in hand, unsure what tomorrow will bring. Inside, the turning point has already arrived, and the man who foresaw defeat before many dared to whisper it now prepares to say it aloud, knowing it will change everything. The train slows as it enters the outskirts of Berlin. Industrial blocks slide past a window, many of them collapsed or blackened. Smoke rises from distant chimneys, push a run beyond capacity. Supply trucks move in narrow convoys along the road that parallels the tracks. Galland sits alone in the compartment. The briefcase containing the report rests on the seat beside him. He keeps his hand on it, not out of fear of theft, but because it represents the single conversation no one wants to have. The train stops at the central platform. Officers wait for him near the exit. As he steps out, they salute quickly. Her general. The conference is scheduled in 30 minutes. Transport is ready. Galland nods and follows him through the station. The building is colder than the air outside. Windows are cracked. The upper lights flicker intermittently. They enter a staff car. The driver accelerates into the city streets. Rubble lines several blocks. Civilians move quietly, their faces turned downward. A column of wounded soldiers limps past, escorted by medics. The driver avoids the main artery, turning into narrower streets. Traffic restrictions due to bomb damage, the adjutant explains. Galland watches a line of anti-aircraft crews repositioning equipment. The barrels of the guns point toward an empty sky. The high command building stands heavily guarded. Sandbags are stacked along the entrance. 2 sentries check identification before allowing Galland inside. He walks through the long corridor toward the briefing room. Inside, the table is already half full. Generals sit with their folders neatly aligned. A large map of the Western Front covers the far wall. Colored pins mark areas that have shifted in only the last 48 hours. When Galland enters, conversations pause. He places his briefcase on the table, opens it, and sets the signed report in front of him. A senior marshal leans forward. General Galland, we have received preliminary summaries. Some of your conclusions appear uncompromising. Galland does not respond immediately. He waits for the marshal to continue. We are concerned that such assessments may affect morale at a critical moment. Galland folds his hands. Morale does not alter fuel supply. It does not repair aircraft. It does not reverse the loss of air superiority. A murmur spreads across the table. Another officer, sharper, younger, interjects. The Fuhrer expects a strategic proposal, not a statement of impossibility. Galland turns his head. Then he will receive both. Silence follows. The marshal signals for the meeting to begin. A stenographer takes position near the wall. The officers open their folders. Galland remains standing. He walks to the map. This, he says, pointing at the Ruhr, is no longer defendable from the air. Our fighter strength is insufficient to intercept sustained bomber formations. He moves his hand southward. This corridor will collapse within days. Patton's units are advancing faster than our logistics can respond. Allied fighter bombers operate freely over the roads. He steps back. The Luftwaffe cannot provide strategic defense under current conditions. The marshal raises a hand. Your report uses the phrase operational disintegration. That suggests failure. Galland meets his gaze. It is failure. A few officers shift uncomfortably in their seats. Others watch him without expression. The younger officer speaks again. You exaggerate. New jet units are forming. The Me-262, Galland interrupts, is arriving in numbers too small to change the war. And even if available, fuel scarcity renders them grounded. Production cannot outpace loss. The officer stiffens. You undermine the will of this command. I state the condition of the Luftwaffe, Galland replies. A door opens at the far end of the room. A political liaison enters, carrying a slim folder. His presence tightens the atmosphere. He scans the table, then focuses on Galland. General Galland, he says, your remarks have reached the Chancellery. They are considered pessimistic. Galland remains still. I was asked to confirm whether these statements reflect your official position. Galland gestures toward the report. What is written there is accurate. The liaison steps closer. The Fuhrer expects solutions, not declarations of defeat. Galland closes the folder and places his hand on it. Then he must allow us to speak truthfully. A faint, tense silence spreads across the room. No one moves. The liaison's expression remains neutral, but his jaw tightens. Truth must serve the state, he says. Galland answers calmly. Truth serves reality. The marshal intervenes quickly. Let us proceed with the technical section of the report. The liaison steps back, but does not leave. Instead, he takes a seat in the corner. For the next hour, officers present logistical charts, sortie numbers, attrition graphs, and ammunition shortages. Lines on the boards indicate reduced combat readiness. Every figure supports Galland's conclusions. When they finish, the marshal turns to him. General, do you propose any course of action? Galland flips the report open. Reallocation of remaining aircraft to defensive hubs. consolidation of maintenance, cessation of futile dispersal flights, limiting operations to targets where success is possible, not symbolic. The younger officer speaks sharply. Symbolic actions maintain civilian faith. Galland answers without looking at him. Symbolic actions cost pilots. He closes the report again. We have lost enough. After the conference, the officers file out silently. Only Galland and the liaison remain. The liaison walks toward him. Your candor is dangerous, he says quietly. Galland picks up his briefcase. Not as dangerous as continuing the illusion. The liaison steps into his path. You risk consequences. High-level decisions require unity. Galland stops. Unity is not achieved by ignoring the ground beneath our feet. They face each other for a moment. Neither moves. Finally, the liaison steps aside. This discussion is not over. Galland leaves the room without replying. Outside, the corridor feels colder. A pair of aides walk past whispering. They stop when he approaches, then hurry away. Galland continues toward the exit. When he reaches the street, snow is falling again. The city moves slowly, burdened by shortages and exhaustion. Banners hang from damaged buildings, flapping weakly in the wind. A staff car arrives to take him back to the station. As the vehicle pulls away, Galland watches the Capitol recede in the mirrors. The weight of the meeting lingers, but his expression does not change. He sits straight, hands folded, eyes forward. The car enters a long avenue lined with ruined structures. Fires burn in metal barrels. Workers shovel debris from the tram tracks. In the distance, sirens begin to wail. Another air raid warning. Galland listens to the rising tone. He does not look up. He closes his eyes for a moment, then reaches into his coat and touches the report inside. The truth he has delivered now begins its path upward, toward leaders unwilling to hear it, and toward consequences he cannot yet measure. The sky over the front is a pale gray, stretched thin by winter. A line of trucks moves along the muddy road toward the forward command post. Radio antennas sway. With each bump, snow gathers on the tarps covering crates of equipment. Galland stands near the entrance of the operations tent. He watches a group of mechanics repairing a damaged staff car under makeshift lighting. The rhythmic sound of tools hitting metal echoes across the field. Inside the tent, a large table displays updated maps. Allied arrows push deeper into German territory. Some sectors no longer show defensive lines, only empty space. An officer enters hurriedly. General, message from the Capitol. High Command requests confirmation of your movements. Galland takes a paper, reads it, folds it, and places it in his coat pocket without comment. Prepare my transport. I leave at dusk. The officer nods and exits. Galland remains still for a moment, studying the map. A single red flag marks the last operational fighter group under his oversight. He moves it slightly to the east, aligning it with the most recent reconnaissance report. Outside, dusk settles slowly. Soldiers move between tents carrying fuel cans, blankets, and radio parts. The hum of generators mixes with distant artillery. A jeep approaches. The driver steps out. General Galland, ready when you are. Galland climbs in. The vehicle drives along the perimeter road. Smoke rises from a cluster of chimneys near the field kitchen. Several pilots walk past, carrying helmets under their arms. One of them stops and salutes. Her general requests from the squadron to resume patrols at sunrise. Galland studies a young pilot's face, then glances at the airstrip. Only 2 operational aircraft remain visible. Concert fuel, he says. Patrol only if ground command authorizes. The pilot nods. Jaw. The jeep continues. As they approach the far end of the field, a supply train rumbles past on a narrow railway. Several wagons are empty. Others carry crates marked with warning symbols. Night falls. Galland boards a small liaison plane. The pilot gives a brief signal before closing the canopy. The engine starts, coughing once before settling into steady vibration. The aircraft lifts off. The field shrinks below. A network of dim lights marks the scattered positions of the German retreat. Farther out, brighter flashes illuminate the horizon where artillery fires uninterrupted. Galland looks out the window. The landscape is dark and broken by snow-covered fields. Roads wind like thin scars across the terrain. Occasional fires burn unattended. The flight continues silently. He opens his briefcase and removes a report, reading a section he has already memorized. Numbers, losses, projections, all of them unchanged. He closes it and rests on his lap. The plane lands at a forward headquarters used jointly by several commands. Searchlights sweep the sky as the aircraft taxis to a halt. Inside the main building, officers from multiple branches gather around a large operations display. Galland walks among them, unnoticed at first, until a colonel turns. "General Galland, we weren't expecting you so soon. I need updated positions of all remaining fighter units." The colonel hesitates, then points to an aide. "Bring the ledger." The aide returns with a thick binder. Galland opens it. Pages list units, their aircraft, their fuel reserves, their last known coordinates. Most entries are marked with downward arrows or red lines. He scans each one carefully. "What is the reliability of these numbers?" The colonel answers softly. "Lower each by 20%. Communications are inconsistent." Galland shuts the binder. "Then we no longer have a defensive belt." No one contradicts him. A communications officer approaches. "General, Allied broadcasts intercepted an hour ago. Patton's forces are expected to cross the river by morning." Galland walks to the map on the wall. He studies the river line, then the terrain behind it. And Eisenhower? Coordinating air support for crossing. Multiple airfields already operational. Galland taps the map lightly. They have synchronized their advance. They know we cannot answer. The room stays silent. Later, Galland steps outside into the freezing air. The ground crunches under his boots. A line of wounded soldiers is being moved into a medical tent. Stretchers pass by quietly. Lanterns hang from poles. Flickering with the wind, a junior officer approaches him. "General, many here believe reinforcements will arrive. They say new formations are moving from the east." Galland looks at him for a long moment. "Do you believe that?" The officer lowers his eyes. "No, sir." Galland adjusts his gloves. "Then use the time you have. Prepare your men for withdrawal. Do not wait for orders that will not come." The officer tightens his posture. "Understood." He returns to his unit quickly. Before dawn, Galland enters the communications tent. Radios crackle with overlapping transmissions. Operators adjust dials, scribbling notes on narrow strips of paper. A senior radio officer hands Galland a headset. "Interception from the Allied frequency. You may want to hear this." Galland listens. English voices exchange coordinates. Airfields, bridges, road junctions. Clear, calm, precise. No urgency. No doubt. The transmission ends. Galland removes the headset and sets it on the table. "They move as one machine," he says. No one responds. As the first hint of daylight touches the horizon, Galland walks to the edge of the airstrip. Frost covers the ground. Ice clings to the wings of a grounded aircraft nearby. He looks upward at the pale sky. The faint rumble of engines approaches from the west. Not German. The sound is heavier, layered, disciplined. Minutes later, distant silhouettes emerge. A formation of Allied fighters sweeping low across the front, unchallenged. Soldiers on the ground pause to watch. Some raise their heads slowly. Others simply keep moving. Galland remains still. The aircraft pass overhead, continuing eastward toward their objective. When the sound fades, Galland exhales once, steady and contained. He turns and walks back toward the command post. A sentry salutes as he passes. Inside, officers wait around the central table. Galland places his briefcase beside the map. "Begin evacuation plans," he says. "Coordinate with all units. Prioritize survivors, not positions." The officers hesitate only a second before moving. Telephones ring. Papers shuffle. Boots strike the floor with direction and urgency. Galland stands at the center of the room, hands on the table, watching the map as if it were slowly dissolving. The war has already chosen its direction. He recognized it long ago. Patton and Eisenhower recognized it earlier still. There is no more strategy to invent, only truth to face. He closes the briefcase, lifts it under his arm, and walks toward the doorway. Behind him, the command post fills with movement. Ahead, the corridor stretches into dim light. He steps into it without pausing. The sound of distant engines returns, steady and undeniable. Fade,